Win big with new DRF All Access past performances. With one best-in-class product, you now get all three past performance formats. Go to DRF.com and use coupon code ONEFREEPP for a free single card today.
Hi everyone, Brad Free with David Aragona. This is Daily Racing Forum's Derby Watch. David, one new name to the list this week and one significant drop. Who were they?
Yeah, there were some changes to the list this week. Perhaps not as many changes as we were expecting, but we did see a big effort from Deterministic coming back off the long layoff in the Gotham, and I think that performance earned him a spot way up the list. He was not previously on our Derby Watch radar, though. He was a horse that we were anticipating his 3-year-old debut, and he came back in a big way in the Gotham, and I moved him all the way up to be the third choice on the list at 12-1. I think that represents the wide open nature of the state of this 3-year-old race to the Kentucky Derby right now. Some others downgraded them a little bit off the performances from last week, but Deterministic definitely thrust himself into the picture as a major player.
I am not going to second guess your prices, David. I think the 12-1 is a realistic price. I just can't shake the feeling that we, the public, myself included, are just overreacting a little bit when we see an impressive win like Deterministic. And it was impressive, but this is a 2-start colt who has a lot of things left to prove, only one more prep in which to do it. Am I, overthinking it, or is it possible that maybe we're overreacting a little bit to a good colt who ran well?
No, I don't think you're overthinking it at all. And this list and the odds that I'm setting, they're not so much based on our own opinions. I think I view it as a morning line based on the public opinion. And I think Deterministic is a horse that people got very excited about last week based on that performance, giving all the hurdles that he had to overcome in achieving it. But I think we're going to see some other horses step forward with similar efforts in the coming weeks, or at least I hope so. So you would imagine that there's a possibility some horses could leapfrog him, but that's kind of the state of this Kentucky Derby march towards the first Saturday in May every year, sort of the latest shiny new thing that comes along, everyone gets obsessed with until the next one comes along.
Yeah, we're going to talk more in depth about the Gotham Stakes in just a few minutes. Let's talk about a significant drop from the list. He's significant. I'm referring to Speakeasy. You had him listed at 30-1 last week, which was a legitimate price for a colt who had started only once. But had he run in the Fountain of Youth, it's a race I think he would have won. He didn't run, and now he's completely off the list. What happened with regards to Speakeasy?
Yeah, it was just a weird set of circumstances with all of those scratches from the Fountain of Youth, which we'll get into. He was the final one before they broke from the gate, as he actually made it into the post parade, but ran off under Arad Ortiz, got a laceration, I think, bumping into the rail. So forced to be a vet scratch from that race, and he's going to take some time to recover. So it's not been announced yet that he's officially off the Kentucky Derby trail, but I think his path forward has gotten much more difficult. So we've taken him off the list to represent that.
Yeah, his path toward the Kentucky Derby has become virtually impossible. He's going to miss, according to trainer Todd Pletcher, at least 1 week of training. So, I mean, even if he were to come back and, win a major prep race in a romp, he would be going into the Derby, making his third start. That is a whole lot to ask. He's a very good colt. There are other races out there besides the Kentucky Derby that I'm sure we'll see Speakeasy in down the road. Let's talk about some of the price adjustments that you made. And I don't think there's a more snake bit Derby contender this year than Locked, who began the season right at the top of the list. And all of a sudden he's been revised from 12-1 last week to 20-1 this week. Talk a little bit about Locked.
Yeah, I don't know if Locked has been the same price from 1 week to the next the entire time that we've been doing it this season, but it just feels like his path towards actually making a 3-year-old debut has been fairly tumultuous, missing the intended seasonal debut in the Sam F. Davis with a fever, came back after a brief break in his training, appeared to be training well into the Fountain of Youth, but Todd Pletcher apparently not liking the way he galloped the morning of the race, so as a precautionary measure removed him from the Fountain of Youth, and now it seems like his status is somewhat uncertain certain. I guess the difference, though, between him and a horse like Speakeasy is that Speakeasy would be making just the second start of his career if he were to run in a final round Derby prep. At least Locked has that foundation of strong performances at Grade 1 company from his 2-year-old season, but it's still a tall order to just have one prep race for the Kentucky Derby, and it's looking like if they get him back on the trail, that would be the case for him. So I did lower his price from 12 to 1 to 20 to 1.
And so Locke's price drifts upward. And Dorno, he didn't do anything wrong the other day, David, and yet you pushed his odds up as well. I think deservedly so, from 12 to 1 to 15 to 1. Talk a little bit about Dorno.
Yeah, we'll talk more in depth about impressions from the Fountain of Youth, but I think given all of the defections from that race, we were expecting him to put on a show against the competition that he was facing, and he didn't quite do that. The Beyer speed figure was not particularly impressive. He had to work to grind out the victory, was unprofessional with his lead changes, a habit that we had seen from him last year. So not seeing some of the mental steps forward that maybe some others have made above him on the list, like Sierra Leone and Timberlake in their seasonal debuts from Dorno. So I did increase his price just a little bit from 12 to 1 to 15 to 1.
A couple others whose odds dropped just a little bit include Just a Touch from 30 to 1 down to 20 to 1 off his Gotham runner-up finish. We'll talk about that race in just a minute. And we're also going to be talking about Conquest Warrior, who passed the 2-turn test by winning a one other than allowance. We're going to talk about that race as well. His odds dropped from 25 to 1 down to 20 to 1. Okay, let's go a little bit deeper into the main Derby preps last weekend, the ones we think were the most relevant, those being the Gotham, the Fountain of Youth, the one other than at Gulfstream Park, and we'll touch briefly on the San Felipe that was run out at Santa Anita. David, let's start off. I was a little surprised myself that the Gotham turned out to be, I think, the most significant prep race of the week. But I think that the top two finishers are both legitimate. Let's talk a little bit about the Gotham.
Well, that was largely a function of this field actually holding together with 11 runners, and there were some good ones in here, and I think the two that most people were anticipating running big races did deliver on the racetrack, those being both of the second-time starters, Deterministic and Just a Touch. I think you had to like everything you saw from Deterministic. Breaking from an inside post position, he had to deal with that sloppy kickback. I thought Joel Rosario did a good job giving him an education in just his second career start, and you had to really appreciate the horse's professionalism coming through between horses and going to the inside in the stretch, not right on the rail, because I don't think you want it to be too far inside on the Saturday Carded Aqueduct over that very wet, messy surface, but he was really striding out nicely to the wire and gave some confidence that maybe more ground could be within this horse's wheelhouse.
Let's take a look at the stretch run of the Gotham Stakes, and that's Deterministic in the pink silks in about third right now. He's kind of idling, waiting, looking for a seam, Just a Touch to his outside, and in deep stretch, once he finally finds that seam, Deterministic, he really leveled off. That's Just a Touch on the outside, finishing well. But Deterministic, this was a visually impressive performance. I think you'll agree.
Yeah, we saw it in his career debut that he just makes this relentless run. I mean, on debut at Saratoga, he had a lot to do after a slow start, launched this wide rally around the far turn and just kept on finishing through the wire. And I think we saw similar attributes from him in the Gotham Stakes, obviously placed a little bit closer to the pace, which is something you like to see from a horse's first start to second start, breaking more professionally. But he still showed that strong finish towards the end. Obviously, it was a sloppy racetrack, but since he ran so well and fast going on debut, I'm not viewing it as some sort of wet track freak, and I think we're going to learn a lot more about him next time when he inevitably stretches out to 2 turns, but he does give off the impression he's one that might not have a problem with it. I think you can say similar things about Just the Touch, who also showed that he can run back to his strong sprint debut effort going a little bit longer.
Yeah, both colts improved. In the case of Deterministic, he improved quite a bit over last summer. You would expect him to. You could also maybe project improvement for his next start as well. Lightly raced colt on his way up to bigger and better things. And Just a Touch, he did not win the race as the favorite, but he ran well enough in a race that I think was designed kind of as a bridge toward a 2-turn race. Historically speaking, David, the Gotham has not been a race that has produced top Kentucky Derby finishers. It's a 1-turn race in early March. A lot of the horses that enter the Gotham are not really legitimate Derby candidates, but I think that this year might be an exception. Both these colts, Deterministic and Just a Touch, they are bred to run on. They have shown finishing kicks around 1 turn that suggests they can stay a longer trip. And we've mentioned this before, even though the Gotham has not been productive for a Kentucky Derby winner lately, since it was shortened to a one-turn mile, this is the type of year, in this year, where it's highly unlikely that the Derby winner comes from California. And by the way, 7 of the last 12 Derby winners have come from California. That includes Medina Spirit. So with the likelihood of no Derby winner from California, it kind of opens up the possibility that the Derby winner is going to come from perhaps a different direction, maybe from the Gotham. We'll find out. The Fountain of Youth at Gulfstream Park was on Saturday. This is the race that I think we kind of expected to be the most significant Derby prep that was run last weekend. It turned out to be anything but. David, take us to the Fountain of Youth.
Well, there was that series of scratches. We learned early on Saturday morning that both Locked and Victory Avenue were coming out of the race. We learned much later, right before post time, that Speakeasy was coming out of the race. And those were 3 of the horses that were going to attract the most support on the tote board. It left Dorno as a heavy favorite, with really not facing much of a test in his 3-year-old debut, or at least he wasn't supposed to be. Had to work a little bit harder than I think some people expected. Only got an 88 Beyer speed figure for the performance, and visually he didn't exactly wow you. He had to be ridden hard to get away from those foes, was hanging on his left lead and upper stretch before ultimately changing over, a similar attribute that we saw from him as a 2-year-old. So not a big step forward for Dorno, but I think he did enough to keep himself in the mix.
Yeah, he did. Let's take a look at the stretch run of the Fountain of Youth, and you'll see what David was referring to with regards to Dorno not switching leads until the middle of the stretch. That's Dorno on the lead, Ledon on the inside, and he still hasn't switched leads yet. Dorno does it right about here. He finally does, and he wins the race. I don't think we can be overly critical of a horse making his first start since last year. But under the conditions, under the circumstances, I think that maybe we expected a little bit better from him than a low-rated 88 Beyer speed figure. That is the lowest figure ever given to the winner of a Fountain of Youth, to a Fountain of Youth winner who crossed the wire first. Actually, it's a knockout, or the same number a few years ago, but that was he won via DQ. So no matter which way you slice it, the Fountain of Youth was not a particularly fast race. Was it something to build on? Yeah, it really was, but it could have been a lot more had, Speakeasy shown up in the race and or Lock. So I don't know that we learned a whole lot about Dorno, except that he validated what we already knew, and that is, given advantageous conditions like the Remsen last year when the track was inside speed favoring and he wired the field into Remsen, and then the other day a slow pace in a scratch decimated field. So Dorno ran okay, but David, you bumped his odds up off a comeback win. I think you kind of feel similarly.
Yeah, I think if you're viewing the race through the lens that if the field had held together as it was initially intended to, Dorno might not have won. He might have finished 3rd or 4th in the race behind some horses who were capable of running faster speed figures. Though I don't know if it makes sense to take it at face value like that, because I think we saw attributes from Dorno in the Remsen that he can be a horse that waits on competition at times. Maybe he's not the kind of horse that really wants to draw off and win by many lengths. We saw it a little bit from him in his maiden win against inferior competition, but he can be a horse that just waits on that competition somewhat. So I don't want to be too hard on him for the effort, but he is going to have to step forward next time, because at the end of the day, a horse that he beat by 30 lengths in the Remsen got within 2 lengths of him in the Fountain of Youth. And obviously, Ledon has improved since then, but I don't think anybody's mistaking him as a serious Kentucky Derby candidate right now.
I don't think his connections are either, considering he was not even nominated to the Triple Crown, Ledon. He does have 25 points in the bank, however. With regards to had the race held together, I don't think that Dorno would have won. I think Speakeasy would have wired the field. It's all moot, and who really knows what's going to happen. Maybe they'll meet down the road in the Preakness or the Haskell or something like that. The other Gulfstream Park race run last week with potential Derby significance included a horse who still has an awful lot to prove. He has yet to earn a big number, but I think that we liked what we saw from the one other than winner on Friday at Gulfstream.
Yes, Conquest Warrior, who had really turned some heads, breaking his maiden earlier in the Gulfstream Park meet, overcoming a poor start and traffic in the running, was able to win very impressively. Stretched out to the two turns for the first time last Friday, going a mile and an eighth, so a 16th longer than the Fountain of Youth, and he did his job. He was not beating a particularly strong field. I think there were some other horses in the race that just appeared like they didn't really want the distance nearly as much as Conquest Warrior did, but you had to like the visual of the performance. He got a very nice trip, raced professionally, just like he did in that maiden race, but without the trouble that he experienced that day, and was able to go on and win, geared down at the end. He's just a horse who hasn't run particularly fast yet, but being that he's trained by Shug McGahee, I think it's reasonable to expect that there might be more improvement down the line.
Well, he'll have to improve because his next start is expected to be in the Florida Derby against the likes of Fierceness, Dorno, Hades, and of course Conquest Warrior. Let's take a look at the stretch run of the One Other Than. And again, you'll see a visually impressive stretch kick. Okay, he was 3-5 in this race, and he was supposed to win, but he won in a manner that suggests the best is still to come. And jockey Jose Ortiz had a ton left inside the final 16th. We haven't seen the best from this colt yet, have we?
No, and you can see just on the visual, he's a big horse. He's got a lot of range to him. He just looks like one of those old-fashioned thoroughbreds that you see on videotape. I mean, he's a very impressive specimen. No surprise, he went for $1 million before he ever raced. But pairing up those 84 buyers, I think some people were expecting a bit more of a step forward from him. Obviously, he won that race very easily. How much more was in the tank? It's hard to say, but at least he handled the distance. He's going to get another shot at it next month, and he'll have to run faster. But I think just given the fact that others on our Derby Watch have not run buyers that are much higher than the low 90s, it's not like he has that far to come to get himself into the mix as being a major player in the next prep race. So he's very much still in the picture.
No doubt about it. I think he did what was expected of him. No, he did not run fast. And yes, he'll have to run faster next time, but he probably will do just that. Okay, out in California, a race postponed from Saturday to Sunday. And just to acknowledge, we haven't forgotten about the Grade 2 San Felipe Stakes. It was won by trainer Bob Baffert, as expected. And he did scratch Nisos from the race. Nisos is expected to run next in the Santa Anita Derby. And Baffert ran 1-2 with Imagination and Wine Me Up. And neither one of these colts are going to go to the Derby because Churchill Downs has banned Baffert for another year. But David, Imagination validated the performance of May Moon, who's headed to the Arkansas Derby, and Wine Me Up validated the last start win by Nisos, who crushed him last time out, and is going to have Nisos expected to run in the Santa Anita Derby. I guess the reason we're talking about this is because both May Moon and Nisos are going to have an influence on the number of points that are distributed this spring toward the Kentucky Derby, right?
Yes, and if Bob Baffert happens to win 2 final round prep races, that takes a good 200 points off the table and might really lower the threshold for how many points it takes to get into the Kentucky Derby this year. That's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but maybe not too much, because it does seem like a very likely scenario given how well this Bob Baffert's B team of Imagination and Wine Me Up ran in the San Felipe. Brad, it's a race that got a large speed figure, a 96 buyer. I was talking to my colleague Craig Mulkowski, who makes the Timeform US speed figures for DRF, and he gave the race a 119, so a similarly high number. Visually, I wouldn't say that it quite matched up to the number that it got, at least for me. Both horses got very good trips. Bob Baffert obviously finished 1-2, and his 2 got much better trips than the other 2 in the race, who really caused their own problems, or maybe one of them had some problems caused by Wine Me Up heading into that clubhouse turn. But they're probably just not of the same quality as the Bob Baffert pair. Still, though, I don't really know what to make of these horses in the grand scheme of the 3-year-old picture right now, because they're not really getting major tests aside from just matching up against their stablemates at the moment.
Yeah, and they do that in the morning anyway. As regarding the third place finisher, McVeigh, I wouldn't normally even be referring to a maiden in March, but the fact of the matter is McVeigh has 19 qualifying points for the Kentucky Derby. If he runs back in the Santa Anita Derby and hits the board, all of a sudden he has 44 points, which might be enough this year for trainer John Sheriffs to go back to Kentucky with a horse owned by CRK Stables. Of course, last year Skinner was scratched Derby week. That was a race he could have won, Skinner, I believe. But McVeigh, a maiden, if he hits the board in the Santa Anita Derby, if that's where he runs next, and we don't know that, he would probably have enough points. I just want to talk briefly about the Bob Baffert domination of the current division. Now, it's been going on for years, but it's almost reached a fever pitch this year. There have been 9 graded stakes on dirt for males, open to males, for the foals of 2021, 9 of them in Southern California. Baffert has won 8 of those. His only loss was a runner-up finish by Muth in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile that was won by Fierceness. So it's unfortunate that the best 3-year-olds in California, well, it's doubly unfortunate, A, that they're all in one barn, and B, that they cannot run this year in the Kentucky Derby. So there you have it. Anyway, Imagination validated Maymoon, Wind Me Up validated Nisos, and that is a look at 4 potentially significant Derby preps. David, let's take another quick look at the Derby Watch list, and I'm just going to throw out just a couple quick ideas that I had. First of all, regarding Dornock's trainer Danny Gargan, the day after the Fountain of Youth, in a story written by David Grenig from DRF, Gargan elected to kind of focus on the negative, and his quote was, I thought, unusual. Gargan said, and I quote, "I'm sure there are plenty of people out there knocking his performance and saying he beat nobody yesterday." He's referring to Dornock. Well, I think there's a huge difference between knocking a horse and acknowledging the facts. And the facts are Dornock earned the lowest ever Fountain of Youth speed figure in a scratch decimated field, and he has had advantageous conditions in both recent graded stakes wins. Having said that, he is a legitimate Kentucky Derby contender right now. I don't think it's a knock. It's just acknowledging some of the challenges that lay ahead for Dornock. He's not always going to get a great trip, setting the pace on a biased track against suspect competition. So I thought that was a little interesting. As for Deterministic, I liked what he saw. We talked about it earlier. It was a solid comeback race, but the questions that he faces going into spring are, will he be sufficiently seasoned for the Kentucky Derby? It would be only his 4th career start if Chris Clement elects to go that route. Secondly, is he even fast enough? And the truth of the matter is, with regards to speed, I think you can probably ask that question to the entire group, because other than Mystic Dan on that rail biased track at Oaklawn and Fierceness last year in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, none of these Derby candidates have even earned a triple-digit figure. David, what about you?
Yeah, and just kind of responding to some of the points that you made, Dornock has to be a frustrating horse to train, and I kind of get that sense from Danny Gargan's quote. I think you're hoping to see some mental progression from these horses that you know have so much natural talent, and maybe he's not progressing at the rate that he would hope. And I think we saw some of that on Saturday. Sort of an opposite story with Deterministic. Christophe Clement, as we know, not a trainer that is always looking to get 3-year-olds on the Kentucky Derby trail. I believe he's actually never started a horse in the Kentucky Derby before, but when you've got a horse like Deterministic in the barn who just seems to have everything figured out at just the second start of his career, it kind of takes you there. And I think seeing Deterministic move up this list, my takeaway is that it's really not going to take a whole lot to see a lot of movement in the coming weeks on this Derby watch list, because like you were alluding to, Brad, nobody has run particularly fast yet. We saw a horse just run a 93 Beyer in a 1-turn race, and I moved him all the way up to 3rd on this list. So if we see a big breakout performance with a triple-digit Beyer going 2 turns in the upcoming weeks, that horse could skyrocket right to the top of this list. It just remains to be seen who that's going to be.
Yeah, it certainly could happen. Maybe it will. We'll find out. That is a wrap for the Derby Watch recap. We're going to talk about the Tampa Bay Derby in the Derby Watch preview segment. That is coming up next. For David Aragona, I'm Brad Free. Thanks for watching.